Like some shots of his face, I'm like, you were a villain in another life. But then other shots, I was like, I've shipped you with people. Hello YouTube, my name is Marie. Today we're going to talk about 3 different K-dramas that I have not had the chance to discuss with you guys yet because I haven't been able to really balance school and YouTube very well for the past few weeks. So we're going to talk about Yumi Cells, a full mostly non-spoiler review of the first season, and then I'm going to do not quite a first impression for The King's Affections because I've now watched way more than the first 6 or 8 episodes. I'm currently caught up on episode 10. And then finally we're going to round out the video with one that you guys voted that you wanted me to talk about, which is My Name. So there is going to be timestamps down below because each of these shows are very different, so feel free to jump around or watch the whole thing so you help out with the YouTube algorithm. First up is Yumi's Cells. I do have a first impression for Yumi Cells where I discuss some of the character breakdowns and synopsis and all that stuff, so I'm not going to go over that again. This is really going to just be a discussion of how I feel about the show now that it's concluded. And I think that first impression was only 2 episodes, which should indicate to you just how much I did enjoy those first 2 episodes. And after having watched the whole thing, I can wholeheartedly say that this show is absolutely adorable. Basically all of my opinions about the show are the same from the first impression. I really like the characters, the look of the show, like how fun and vibrant it all is, but I think that the pacing and the balance between the in real life human characters and the cells really improved as the show went on. I think in the first 2 episodes I was still getting used to the very youthful representation of the cells, and I think I called them a bit too kiddie. And there was also some pacing issues where the first 2 episodes I felt like when we jumped to the cells, it kind of ruined the momentum of the scene. That really smooths out as the series goes on. I became just as invested in the cells reactions to situations as I was with the real person characters. The only aspect of the cells that I didn't quite love was how episodic they were, and the real life characters in their story is also very episodic, but I think it's just compounded by the cells because there are certain like plot devices that are introduced in the same episode that they become relevant in. I think the biggest example of this is when our love cell like introduces that that weird ball thing that the other cells could throw sandbags at when they were upset with Yumi's boyfriend. And in that episode, they say that that thing had been like erected when the two had started dating, except for, and then it goes backwards to show how the cells have been interacting with it the whole time. But I think it would have been way more powerful to actually show that thing being erected when they do actually start dating with the correct chronological order of the show, because then like the suspense would have built very naturally to do with that thing, and then when it finally breaks and stuff, it would have been more impactful, I think. So that's just one example. There are a few others, but that's a really like nitpicky point on my part, I feel like. Okay, so now I do want to talk about the ending, so there is going to be light spoilers. I was absolutely shocked when this ended, to say the very least, because I thought we had another 2 episodes. Like I had no idea that Yumi Cells was only a 14 episode length drama, and at first, to be quite honest, I was very impressed by the ending. The fact that they didn't end up together, and the fact that it was very I felt very real to real life in how they broke up, and the fact that it was so quiet in those last moments and then we just saw the end flash on the screen. Like I really do like their breakup. It's really not very often that we get a romance K-drama that ends on like a sad note, so I was like, oh wow, this K-drama went there. But those feelings of being initially very impressed kind of went away the longer I thought about the show, because it's very incomplete. I don't think the characters went on enough of a journey for this to feel like a full story. Their romance is very middle school romance like they have major problems with pride and naivete and communication. Like, it's a very young romance, which in itself is not a bad thing, but compared with the ending, I don't feel like the characters really learned anything or really grew all that much. Season 1 is a very incomplete story to me. And so that made me think that like maybe there's a season 2, and I looked it up and they are planning to make a season 2 for sure, but I believe they have plans for a 3rd and a 4th season, which is super exciting. So they want to tell the full story that's within the webtoon. Side note, I am sorry within that first impression that I didn't do my own research and figure out that Yumi Cells did release before Inside Out. I do make a big assumption that Inside Out came out first, and that's simply because it's what I had been exposed to first, and it's also what other people had explained in Yumi Cells to be like. So sorry, I did not do my own research. Where was I again? My long-term enjoyment for Yumi Cells will be dictated by the growth that the characters go through in the subsequent seasons, because it's really an introduction. Like, that's what season 1 is. It's an introduction to Yumi, the people around her, and her flaws. So if we don't get an adequate or satisfying season 2, then my overall opinions of the show as a whole will be not that great. For now, I'm giving it a rating of 3.75 out of 4 stars. Now let's move on to The King's Affection. Like I said earlier, I am currently up to date, and so I'm not quite sure what to call this. It's definitely not a first impression. I'm gonna say maybe like midpoint opinions. So I'm gonna look down for a lot of my synopsis to you, because it's a little bit of a more complicated setup, and I just want to make sure that I cover my bases. The King's Affection is set during the Joseon dynasty, and the crown princess consort secretly gives birth to twins, a girl and a boy, and the boy is the heir to the throne. He will eventually become king. However, Confucianist values really condemns twins, especially if it was a boy and a girl like our situation is, because they just don't think a man who shared space so intimately with a woman will have legitimacy. So to protect the prince's authority and future legitimacy, the current king orders that the daughter be put to death, and no one can know that the prince was ever a twin. Now, the mother fakes the girl's death and spirits her away to live out her life in the countryside. Now we're going to jump forward to many years later, past even the first 2 episodes, because I want to stay clear of those spoilers. And now, that girl, the female twin, has assumed the identity of her brother, because her brother, the prince, died during childhood. And the only people who now know her secret is her chief servant and her personal eunuch. Now let's talk about the pros, because I have quite a lot of them, and that being, I absolutely love the portrayal of everybody involved, especially our female lead. When she's in her prince costume, that she is just like a very pretty boy, and you can't say that for a lot of, you know, the classic girl disguised as a boy trope K-dramas, because at least for me, I would like roll my eyes at the screen being like, how does anybody believe that this beautiful woman is a boy? Like, they're not even being helped out by the makeup department half the time, where in this case, yeah, again, I believe that she's just a very pretty boy. The only thing that I think could have made it better is if they did something to address how short she is. She really is just like this teeny tiny little girl. So I think a scene where like the servant is putting like lifts into her shoes would have just been hilarious, because the height difference between her and her male lead co-stars is really noticeable. So next I want to talk about the pacing, because overall I think it's very, very good. I'm completely absorbed by every episode up until probably episode 8. I have some issues with episode 8 to 10. My mind did wander. I am not as engaged, and I think that's because there's a little bit of a lack of action within episodes 8 to 10. And when action is in this show, it's done incredibly well. So whenever we get an action scene, it's left me wanting more, which is very good. Like, it's a very good way to show action, but because it's so sparse, it's almost a double-edged sword, because I'm like, I know you guys can do action super freaking well, please give me more. Lastly, I want to touch on the romance as a sort of con for me, because it's not bad. I don't think there's anything wrong with the pair. They have some chemistry, but it's not like electric. Like, the romance to me is the part of the show that's the least interesting. Like, I'm watching the show because I really like our female lead, the prince, and I want to see her navigate situations. Like, her dealing with the envoy from China was fantastic. Like, that's what is the strength of this series, not so much the romance yet. Okay, you guys, we are moving on to My Name. This is the show that you guys voted for 3 weeks ago when I asked you what you wanted to see next. And it's no longer a first impression, it's a full review, because I ended up binging the show in I think 1 or 2 sittings. I think there's only 8 episodes, so it is on the shorter side. This is an action revenge story about a girl who's deemed by everyone around her to be a deviant because her father was himself a gangster, and he dies, or is murdered rather, right in front of her, and this is the story of her trying to uncover who did it and exact revenge on the perpetrator. Wow, like, this is such a ride. As soon as it starts, it really captured me, and I was just like, it's like a bullet from a gun. Like, it just goes so fast. It's firing on all cylinders. The soundtrack is fantastic. The action is so good and so believable as well. Like, this actress is like this teeny tiny girl. Just saw her in Nevertheless, and I would never have imagined that actress from Nevertheless could pull off a female action hero. Like, it's fantastic. I just, so much respect. Because the entire series really rests on her and her shoulders. Like, yes, there are other really likable characters. I would say the male lead, who is her partner at the police station, he's very likable, and we'll talk about him in a second. And I also think that the leader of the criminal organization is also a standout. But really, this show is about her, and she's not an over actor by any means. Like, I feel like a lot of her acting is very subdued until it's not, until she's like bawling her eyes out in the street and you're like, oh my gosh, girl. In many ways, I actually was reminded to IU's character from My Mister, and just how subdued and like under the skin all of their emotions are. Now let's talk about that male lead character, because I don't have much to say about him. He's very serviceable, he's fine. The actor, oh my god. He's the same actor from Yumi Cells and then also Itaewon Class. And when my mind made those connections, it was blown. Because for probably half the series, I was looking at him and I'm like, I know you from other places. Like, some shots of his face, I'm like, you were a villain in another life. But then other shots, I was like, I've shipped you with people. So when I finally, like, when it finally all clicked in my head and I'm like, oh my god, you're from Itaewon Class and Yumi Cells, I was blown away. Like, this is a very talented actor, very versatile. I will definitely be watching him for future work. Okay, so my only con is actually the ending, and maybe this is a bit spoilery, but I personally think that this story would have been a really fantastic tragedy, and so I was a little bit disappointed by the ending that it wasn't. But I think that might be a unpopular opinion because my dad also watched My Name and he found it fantastic, and when we talked about the series and I said that, you know, like I kind of wish it was a tragedy, he was completely disagreed from me. My overall rating is a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I would recommend My Name not only to fans of action and crime, but to those casual fans like myself. This is definitely the type of action and crime that I would want to watch when I'm in that sort of mood, because it has a lot of heart behind it, strong characters, and just overall great pacing. Like, I just was along for the ride. Alright, you guys, that is everything from me. Feel free to let me know down below what you've been watching lately, since this is kind of a wrap-up video. Any opinions you have about the shows that I've discussed, and if you've made it this far, leave me some sort of emoji down below just to help with the algorithm. Have a good day and a good night. Bye!